Hello, I'm Deborah Woroff from MECFS Alert, and I'm here on Dr. Peterson's premises in Incline Village, Nevada, near Lake Tahoe. And today, just now, I'm talking with Gunnar Gottschalk, who works running the research and research lab activities for Dr. Peterson. And I especially wanted to talk to him and to give you some idea of what he does, because he's been working on the CDC project of extracting data from a number of doctors' practices to try to define the disease and its subsets in a better way. And I haven't understood very well how this actually worked, so I thought I could ask Gunnar to explain to me. He's finished phase 1, and he could explain to me what he's gathered, how he's tried to lay it out, and so on. So
Sure.
Tell me, you first heard of this project.
Yeah, so we were approached by the Open Medicine Institute and Dr. Andy Kogelnick, who's been a collaborator of ours for a long time with Dr. Peterson. I've worked for Dr. Peterson for about 2 years now.
Right.
We were approached initially by him asking, okay, we need an electronic medical record here at the office. That just expedites research astronomically. So when we first started out, we got this protocol from the CDC. We were required to recruit about 75 of our patients. And essentially what it was simply asking them questions. The first baseline phase of this is simply say, okay, we have these 75 folks. What are your major symptoms? Go ahead and fill out these questionnaires. And then as a research core group, we went through their clinical histories from start to finish. And we didn't just go through them, we actually scanned everything, which makes our life a lot easier. Now we have a searchable database on these folks, and we're really hoping that this will expedite the research. And the results were released by Dr. Beth Unger, who's been the chair of this project recently at an FDA hearing, and at a subcommittee drug development hearing, actually. And so we're really hopeful that phase 2 will continue to bring fruitful results. So.
Why don't you think back and try to remember a few of the questions on the questionnaires that you went over with your, perhaps ones that you felt you were getting particularly interesting responses to?
Questionnaires have always been difficult in this field, and I think they will continue to always be until we have a biomarker.
Yeah.
But, we started out with sort of the run-of-the-mill questionnaires, the SF-36, which a lot of you patients might be familiar with.
I'm not.
Yeah, it's a questionnaire looking at sort of daily functions, social level functioning, and also physiological and physical functioning. So we ask pretty simple questions. Can you climb a flight of stairs? How much energy does that take? Do you have difficulty walking around the block? And then we also have questions that are embedded in that, which are similar to something like, let's see, how much has your sort of social health or well-being, how much has that affected you on a day-to-day basis? So these are all very well-verified questionnaires that have gone through the mill. I know Dr. Lenny Jason has worked extravagantly in this field on that and done some incredible work.
Yes.
I've gotten the pleasure to meet him a few times. So those are sort of the basic questions that we had. The CDC has come up working with a group of physicians, Dr. Peterson included, to come up with a new set of questionnaires, which are shorter, they're less taxing. Those questionnaires were designed by the CDC based off of these other questionnaire parameters, such as the SF-36, the multidimensional fatigue inventory, questions about symptoms, CFS symptoms specifically, depression scales, etc. So they sort of combine those.
Can you give us a little idea of what, let's say I'm here, I'm filling out a questionnaire, one of these new abbreviated ones. What do I have to tell you?
Well, first of all, you're not going to be doing it scribbling anymore. We're doing it electronically, which makes our life much easier. So we have iPads in the office. Generally, folks will come in. A lot of these questionnaires are done at home first, so we can sort of expedite the office visit to a certain extent. I mean, really, what you're going to be answering are predetermined fields. A lot of these are multiple choice questions. We try, and I think this is the reason I'm not a physician, but I'm just guessing, we try not to have free text too much in this research. It's very valuable in some respects, but it's also really difficult to report. Statisticians love ones and zeros, and that's what we try to give them.
So what is the CDC going to learn about me now?
So the CDC is going to get a sense of what this illness is. I think there are definitely some folks there, Dr. Beth Unger, who is very well aware, and a lot of other individuals at the CDC CDC. But they're going to know, okay, what are the primary symptoms? Do you have sincere autonomic dysfunction? Have you had a history of viral infection? You know, do you have a history of autoimmune disorder? Do you have a history of cancer? I mean,
so my family history and my history of disease.
Sure. Yep.
And that's dysfunction.
And dysfunction. And, you know, and really that's where we rely heavily on the patients right now to sort of tell us their story. And this is one outlet in which they can do it. A lot of times with physicians, even at our practice, I mean, if we have a 35, 45-minute appointment, that's not enough to get a full grasp. And then, you know, the questionnaires are extremely important and valid, but I think the real goal of this study, the CDC study in general, was to get a general sense of what these different clinicians do. I mean, there's different, we're one of 5 clinical sites in this study, and our practice can look very different from another individual's practice. And so once we can all sort of come together and ask the same questions, do the same lab tests, I think that's where we'll begin to see subsets of patients across a larger scale of a population sort of shake out.
Right, as opposed to seeing a mishmash of data that's corrupted by different questions being asked and so forth. Now, on the questionnaires that came from the CDC, are there a lot of questions about mood, depression, anxiety? Definitely, and you know that's one of the major things that we, you know, in research studies we must rule out. We know that chronic fatigue syndrome is a neuroimmune disorder. We know it's not a primary major depressive disorder. That's been pretty well cited in the research. So what we've been doing, you know, those questionnaires that we do, they do ask that. There's definitely individuals that develop situational depression. I think, once again, I'm not a doctor, so I think situational would be the description.
So you know, it's something where they've been sick for 20 years, and of course you're going to be depressed if you can't get out of bed. So you know, and that's something that I think more and more people are beginning to accept, sort of globally and specifically in research. But once again, we definitely need those questionnaires to rule out individuals who just might not be appropriate. It's not that they're not sick. It's not that we're not going to take care of them. It's just simply that for this particular type of study, for any study we do, we really have to be careful about who we enroll.
And these questionnaires, and you're wrapping them up, is that the end of phase 1?
That is the end of phase 1.
And you've put them all on computer readable formats.
Yep, and they've been delivered to the CDC. So the great, you know, the model of this was, let's get the CDC kind of on the ground, grassroots style. Let's have the patients answer the questionnaires directly, and then those fed directly from us through the Open Medicine Foundation and their collaboration with the CDC and Dr. Beth Unger and their biostatistician team. So.
And now I think you must be preparing and thinking about how you're going to do phase 2, which I know nothing about.
Right, and you know, unfortunately, I know a little about it. I don't know anything about it either.
Do you know what you have to do now?
Yeah, there's going to be. I mean, we want to continue to have the same folks in this study. We feel that we've developed a pretty good representative population from each clinic. You know, there's definitely an idea to start collecting biological samples. That would be ideal. Once again, especially if we have collaboration from groups like the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, other individuals and groups like that, because they can really help us. And I know phase 2 will sort of have an abbreviated style questionnaire. We have a lot of information on these folks, but our goal as a practice, sort of selfishly, is to enroll as many folks as we can, because it really helps me as a coordinator determine, as we get more protocols for other research studies, who might be best appropriate for that study, whether it's an intervention study, whether it's a biobanking study, you know, whether it's a simple interview study. I mean, we have epidemiologists approach us all the time who want to do interviews.
So you had, I think you said 75 persons in phase 1. So you might conceivably have 150 in phase 2?
We're hoping, and you know, we definitely want to continue. We want to have a sort of continuous group of individuals that flow through phase 1, phase 2, and the next phase is beyond, simply because we've collected data on those folks. Not just the questionnaires, but all of their laboratory data was also given to the CDC. Everything was, you know, all of their
in phase 1, you gave?
Yep. And so all of their, you know, we were responsible for whether it was scanning lab reports, permanently redacting their identifying information, and then transferring them into Excel sheets, which is sort of the best we can do, and then we hope the statisticians can put that into something like R or SAS, which is a real statistical program, to help us sort of make correlations between, an individual who's responding to an SF36, for example, to their natural killer cell function. I mean, that's a study right there. And it might not be the most groundbreaking thing ever, but it's a start.
So you have numbers that can allow the statisticians to connect them, even though they're anonymous.
And we're looking at trends, and so everything, all we did, we didn't change, only thing we changed was the person's name into a number. And we do that on all our studies for obvious reasons. We want to protect our patients and everything else. And that's hugely important to us here, and we take a lot of pride in doing that.
Of course.
But really what we're trying to do is connect what we can, from these, whether it's self-reporting questionnaires or something else, to actual lab results, because once again, we know this is immunological dysfunctional disease, so we'd like to see that come out.
And given that methods have changed dealing with immune data and so on, about how many factors do you think you got in phase 1? Do you think you had NK,
The beauty of this study is, and I can just give you a really quick roundup, is that every site did their, showed the CDC what they do with their patients. So it was a great mix. So it was great to see this sort of collaborative effort where, Dr. Kogelnick has a different intake form than we have, for example, but we can all pick and choose off each other's to make one that's really complete. Dr. Bateman at Salt Lake City, for example, and Dr. Chuck Lapp, other individuals in this group, they all kind of came together and said, what are the most important things that you do when assessing a patient coming in? Okay, well, it's X, Y, and Z. This is what we are this is as a group what we've decided to do. So that's been a really interesting transition.
That's already in phase 1, say Dr. Peterson contributing and Dr. Bateman and everyone putting this all in and getting something out?
Yep. And that's where we relied on the CDC to actually make to do the statistics for us. This was a huge amount of data.
So you formulated common data formats and questionnaires, and that's already all done. And how much immune data does it have in it that you recall? NK cells and Bs?
Yeah, I mean, we look at, at Sierra Internal Medicine, we do a lot of immune parameters, whether it's whether it's NK cell enumeration panels, function panels, to gamma clonal T cell rearrangements, things that are just based around the immune system. We're currently hired, Cimarron Research just recently hired an immunologist, Dr. Isabel Barrio, to help us sort of write studies and take this data that we have, because we have so much of it. I wish I could show you guys the storage facility where there's 40,000 charts stored, patient records of about 11,000 people or so. So each person has 10 or something records. So we have a lot of this data, and we're just trying to use institutions like the CDC or anybody else who can deal with mass data. The Open Medicine Institute, that's really been their specialty, and that's Dr. Andy Kogelnick has done an incredible job. Bringing people together, and then furthermore taking the data together and shipping it off in a common format, so that the CDC can then interpret it for us.
I think you mentioned to me earlier, which I think not everyone knows, certainly I didn't, that Dr. Kogelnick did a double PhD. So he has a PhD in computer science as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So he's quite the nerd. Geek, excuse me. He's quite the geek.
So that's why it's kind of unparalleled as far as having somebody with that much expertise in ME/CFS field in general, and then being able to bring the other side, which is the IT part.
That's great.
Which is why the Open Medicine Institute, we're really hoping is going to become a champion of this disease and we'll be able to continue to collaborate with him.
Right, and he's just over the mountain.
Exactly.
Which is really handy.
Easy.
But now, okay, so we're facing phase 2.
Yep.
And what have you been getting together now?
Well, we've been actually, Dr. Peterson's been taking in. We've had some new patients come in, so we'd like to definitely include those folks specifically to our EHR electronic history record model. Once again, selfishly for research purposes, but also for this study. And it's so we start generally by taking the labs that they come in on their first visit. We take a lot of care to try to best understand and abbreviate Dr. Peterson's sometimes voluminous dictations about the first visit. So some of these are 5 or 6 pages long, and so we've really got to kind of pick out what it is, so that when we go through a symptom checklist form, You know, I go through it, we have the interns go through it, somebody goes through it. And
make it workable.
Make it workable, then we show it to Dr. Peterson, he signs off on it, and then we know, okay, this is sort of the general parameters of this patient, patient X, call it.
Now, how does that relate to the CDC, and how does that get there?
So all that data then gets shipped to Dr. Kogelnick down at Open Medicine Institute. They put it into the format like I was describing. I'm kind of far disconnected from that. They then ship it to the CDC essentially. So it goes down in a de-identified format from us into a central database, which would be Dr. Kogelnick, and then out to the CDC or anybody else that wishes to take a look at this data.
And do you know what phase 2 is trying to accomplish in particular, as differentiated from phase 1?
I think certainly, you know, we'd like to verify what we found in phase 1 first of all. I mean, that's always science, has to be repetitive. We'd like to verify some of the site-to-site differences that we saw initially.
From one doctor to the next.
Right, and then I think too, there's definitely a push. And I'm not sure if this is going to happen or not yet, but definitely I'd like to see some sample collection. I think that'd be a really positive thing. I mean, we have these folks in here, they're in the office. There's no reason why, you know, we can't do a blood draw on them if they consent. And that's just part of the process. And I know that other folks at the CDC and the NIH are really interested in that as well, because once again, not only do we actually have the clinical database, then we would have biological samples to match with that. And that's where we're looking for, you know, any collaborators out there. I mean, we have plenty of samples, we have plenty of willing patients to go ahead and just send us some protocols, because we're ready to go.
I think we should mention, as you said to me earlier, that Dr. Peterson has a really formidable biobank of his own, and that he contributed to Dr. Lipkin's studies quite a lot.
Yeah, and we've had the the honor of working with Dr. Ian Lipkin, who's just an absolute incredible virologist, and his group at the Center for Infection and Immunity, along with the Chronic Fatigue Initiative. That's been a great working group. A lot of my relationships, a lot of what I know about chronic fatigue syndrome has been based off of that work over the past 2 years. So, we do have a large biobank of about 6,000 biological samples. We have a lot of spinal fluid. That's sort of what we've been. I think for Dr. Peterson, that is something that he feels that this disease is just so intimately connected with the central nervous system, that's a cavity that potentially is worth really looking into. And that was, hopefully we'll be getting some results shortly from an investigation we did with the Center for Infection and Immunity and Dr. Connie Knox from Wisconsin Bio Research Group, looking at spinal fluid of 60 chronic fatigue syndrome patients and 60 MS and other neurological disease patients.
What endpoints are you looking at for that?
We're really relying on Dr. Lipkin to come up with something. So this is a pure biobanking. This is sort of what I describe as, we're almost, we're sort of brokered for samples, because not only once again do we have the samples, but we have the clinical information that corresponds to that, which is, when we go to write a paper, it's one thing if you just took spinal fluid from random people, you wouldn't find anything. But because these people are so highly categorized and we know so much about them, it becomes hopefully a really powerful tool. And we'll see what Dr. Lipkin comes up with. I'm pretty excited. I think everybody is.
So the New York group has really relied on you for spinal fluid.
Yeah, I mean, us and probably a bunch of other people too. We just, like I said, we had the honor to work with him, and just because of the collaborations that we had done with the previous XMRV study and the pathogen discovery program through the CFI, this sort of came out of it as just an interesting look. Dr. Mady Hornig's also been intimately involved with this project as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think you've finally led me to some understanding of what the CDC project is all about.
Cool.
And I wish you luck with phase 3 and phase 4 and 5 and 6.
25, down the line.
To infinity. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good luck.
Bye.